would like to stay on and see your lovely faces, that would be brilliant. So the purpose of today is my name is Ben, by the way, Ben Tolhurst. I'm from Business Declares, and I'm going to attempt to host this 45-minute session. The purpose today is to share the learnings of the 10th International Degrowth Conference, and in doing so, what we want to do is explore a number of important topics which impact on business. Now, degrowth is arguably, surely, one of the biggest elephants in the room in the business world. We know we can't grow infinitely on a finite planet, but at the same time, we're all existing in this sort of capitalist existence, which is predicated on growth. And as one, I think he was an economist, as one person said, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, right? So today I'm joined by Sam Baker from Business Declares, who's made the 33-hour bus journey from London to Pontevedra in Spain for this conference. And I will obviously say that is a degrowth compliance journey. And Uygar Özesmi, who is a social entrepreneur in Turkey and founder of Trust for Good, which is a platform for sustainable lifestyles and ecological and social well-being, who's also joined Sam at the conference and is also part of this session. So firstly, Sam and Uygar, please could you give me a really brief 2-minute intro to everybody on the call? And everybody on the call, feel free to add any details about yourself by way of intro, and any questions that you have throughout, just bung them in the chat and I will do my best to pick them up. But Sam and Uygar, over to you.
Very good. So as the junior of the two, I'll go first. I'm not talking about age, experience here. So yeah, background in professional services, very much believed towards the end of that career that we could create change through big business. Eventually concluded that actually that wasn't possible, and it wasn't really impossible. It wasn't really possible because of the system, and the system rewarding business for a particular type of performance, aka growth and short-term financial performance and growth, sort of growth and profitability. So really moved away from that, began to focus on the system, found Business Declares, delighted to be working with Business Declares and the 3 directors. And the key part of certainly what I'm very much at the learning stage, but a key part of my journey at the moment is really trying to think of alternative economic systems, but bring that to business and trying to help business understand what they need to do in this system in order to contribute both to the transition to a fairer, safer system, but also not just in that transition, but also support that transition. So that's where I am now. I do Climate Fresk, which is a 3-hour climate change workshop, and talk about degrowth. And what I want to do is, with the help of Uygar, is move towards a more practical, hands-on sort of demonstration of what degrowth might mean at a local level. Uygar.
Thank you, Sam. I also work with a lot of businesses. We have about 800 different businesses on goodfortrust.org. Which is essentially a prosumer economy laboratory. And the prosumer economy is something like a forest that you see here, an economy that exists like a forest, completely circular, abundant, productive. And we say that it is an alternative to capitalism. Well, Ben said it's more easy to see like the end of the world, but actually, what Ursula K. Le Guin said is, we live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable today, but so did the divine right of kings. And any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. So therefore, I don't think we are in a hopeless situation. We are just in the opposite right at this moment, in the very hopeful situation. And I say this from experience because I have served as an executive director of Greenpeace Mediterranean for 5 years. Then I founded change.org in Turkey, and we won in the last 10 years over 1,100 campaigns to create a better world. So I believe we have the power, we have the ability to change, and we can't do this alone. For this, I think the biggest power is business. And I think that's why I'm here today.
Cool. Thank you very much, both. Really appreciate your introductions. We're going to move pretty fast today because we need to stick to time. So I'd just like to say, before we begin, this conference that you've both been to, this International Degrowth Conference, I mean, what was it set out to do and who was there? Could you both just give a quick summary of what that was all about?
Okay, so again, maybe I'll start. So yeah, once I got off the bus and stretched my legs, so we found ourselves in Pontevedra, which is in itself is arguably a demonstration of sort of degrowth. It was one of the first European cities or large towns to pedestrianize. It's won urban planning awards, etc., etc. So we were based there. It is an outpost of the Vigo University, and the Vigo University has a degrowth lab, so it was a great place to have it. As Ben said, this was the 10th, but it was paired with the European Society for Ecological Economics. So it's a 15th sort of anniversary or 15th version of their conference and the 10th of degrowth. So they were brought together. It was a 3-day conference, and over that period, I mean, slightly more academic perhaps than I suspected, but no worse for that. There were an enormous number of abstracts. So 950 abstracts were presented across a massive variety of topics. Many case studies, practical applications, as well as concepts, theories, economics, all the way down to, business operations, etc., etc. And then 1,200 people. So, what was it trying to? It was actually entitled "Science, Technology, and Innovation Beyond Growth," but it was sort of broader than that. And yes, that did feature, but it was much broader than that. So, in my sort of sense, what it was trying to do, I think, first of all, just to bring people together. I mean, it is so powerful, I think, as we know, when we come off Zoom, we meet people, and particularly if we spend 2 to 3 days together. So hugely powerful. Virtually every country in Europe represented, and many outside of Europe as well. All sorts of interesting networks and people and small businesses and big businesses and etc. So that was massively powerful. But secondly, I mean, it's an opportunity for us really, I think, to upskill ourselves in, what this might mean, how this might look, practical applications, and allow us all go back to wherever we are with a better story and a better toolkit and better opportunity to communicate what we think is right. So
thank you. Thanks, Sam. Uygar, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Pontevedra is a very nice city. That's true. And as a small city, it also shows that small cities can be vibrant, and we don't all need to be in a big city. I visited Bilbao after Pontevedra, and I thought to myself, which city do I want to live in? I thought to myself, Pontevedra. So there must be definitely a reason why this beautiful little town can be vibrant, can be economically viable, and still good. I think it was a good example of that, and I'm glad it was there. Although it was difficult to get there, but that's okay. Good things are difficult to reach, right? Mm-hmm. So I was hopeful again in the sense that there were 1,200 people interested in degrowth from all over Europe. And that is something quite important because it is an indication that there is a tremendous interest in that. And for me, the most interesting thing was also, I know Sam Baker from a march he did for climate years ago. And, whichever session I go, I end up seeing him. So I'm thinking, my God, there are 950 different papers and I don't know how many parallel sessions. How come that I go to one that I pick? And here again, Sam Baker. How does that work? I mean, what is happening here? That was a surprise to me. But it also shows that you find your niche in a place like that. Your interests guide you. When there are so many different sessions, essentially the things that you think will instigate change, will allow us to move our direction. There were those elements. There are also very boring elements, I must say, right? But that's what happens when there are so many papers, right?
Uygar, I just need to pause you there. I don't wish to be rude, but I'm just wanting to get into the next session.
Please do so. Please do so.
I love the fact that you've both conveyed the magnitude of numbers of people there and the interesting coincidence of bumping into each other from a previous life. So thank you for that. I will be asking you in a minute to tell me your top 1 or 2 takeaways that we can maybe have a more detailed discussion on. But before we do that, definition. Could one of you or both of you just please give the people on this call a very nice definition of degrowth, because it gets such a bad press, and you know, we're going back to the caves and it's recession and all this business, and I don't think we spend enough time just summarizing it. So who would like to do that?
So, Uygar, if you want to kick off, or shall I kick off and just?
Sure, I can say a few words. I mean, degrowth does have reactions in people. I mean, we posted a Twitter post about Vincent Ligay's participation in our Prosumer Economy Conference, who was also one of the leaders of the degrowth movement in Pontevedra. And there was an incredible reaction, like degrowth is death and so forth, from a US audience and so forth. So there is a definite, you know, a reaction to it. That's a fact. That's a reality. And that's why a lot of people say post-growth. So with using the post-growth terminology, they try to go over that. But also Vincent says that, you know, we chose degrowth for a specific reason. And that's the reason, because it has this kind of reaction. It can never be co-opted. It is a terminology that is very effective in driving the point that we need to degrow. And that's, I think, fair to say.
Cool. Yeah, so just to add to that, so I'd reference the sort of the opening address of the conference. So we had 3 people on stage. We had which included Dan O'Neill, sort of representing ecological economics. We had Georgios Kallis representing degrowth, and a third party, and apologies to them for not remembering their name. So and they sort of stepped through, I guess, you know, where the interfaces and the interdependencies are, but through that helped me certainly think more clearly about what these things are. And so for, you know, ecological economics, probably rather like donut, you know, very simply that Dan O'Neill started with that thing of economics in the middle, society around it, and then environment around that. So 3 concentric circles. You could almost add nature over and above environment, depending on how you interpret environment. So, you know, with the simple point that it was initially initiated as a critique of the existing narrow, myopic sort of definition and science, social science of economics. You know, and then Georgios Kallis talking about degrowth. You know, again, the origination of that was really a critique of the growth-orientated, the growth hegemony that we see in the current system. And so strong critique. And then with post-development, again, the critique, it started out as a critique, and a critique of the existing deficiencies of development, international development, and this idea that, you know, you can dispense with, you know, you can help development, therefore you get some equality between countries, which is, you know, clearly seem to be nonsense. And so all of them started almost with critiques of existing things, sciences, body of sciences, thinking and practice. But obviously, you know, all get challenged to then move forward to more of a blueprint or suggestion of what the future looks like. And so inevitably, you begin to get some overlap. So initially, where you start off quite distinct because you're focusing on something different, you know, as they get more sophisticated, they become not quite blueprints, but sort of, you know, reflections on what's required in the future. They begin to overlap. And there was an interesting discussion: should they be kept distinct? Should they be merged? And, you know, the sort of consensus seems to be keep it separate, keep it as sort of, this is a pluriverse. They do have different flavors. They do have different people studying. They do come from different backgrounds, and therefore it's useful to keep them separate. In terms of degrowth itself, so that critique, I guess, you know, there's long critiques of growth, but I guess I would sort of talk to 2 elements to it, which one would be, you know, what you said, Ben, the sort of, you know, infinite growth on a finite planet. But the point being is that economic growth is seen to be correlated both to raw material footprint and to energy usage. And that is something that we can ill afford at the moment. Sorry, not ill afford. We can't afford that at the moment. And in fact, because we've overshot, we need to come back from that. And so therefore degrowth. So we need some planned shrinkage of certain sectors. Now, there are various suggestions about how you might choose those sectors or choose parts of those sectors. And the most obvious way is to select the ones which create the most damage and deliver the least benefits to the least number of people. And so you might put, you know, and what Jason Hickel does, he puts SUVs in there, you might put private jets in there, etc. So it is a planned sort of reduction in economic activity. That doesn't mean to say everybody degrows. It doesn't mean everybody shrinks. Of course it doesn't. But it does mean that we have to have a net impact of reducing the implications of growth as we know it. The second part of all of this in the critique is, of course, it's a system. It's become a system that feeds off itself. And as a result of that, and a result of that sort of need and that appetite, there are all sorts of unintended, unexpected requirements to continue with that growth, which include extraction, exploitation, inequality. And interestingly, I mean, so when I sort of put a few slides together on this, one of the fascinating, I think it's Tim Perriquet who sort of does a very nice sort of detailed sort of expose of growth. But one of the things that you might have thought was an obvious point is if you do get growth, you almost certainly get a richer, wealthier state. But in every industrialized economy, you've effectively had a decrease in the wealth of the state and an increase in the wealth of the private sector. But of course, that is massively unequally distributed. So anyway, for me, that is sort of part of degrowth. So one is the planned reduction. The second thing is then decoupling well-being from economic growth. So breaking that sort of, notion that they might be coupled and actually thinking about how we might improve our lives without necessarily economic growth. So that's, shared assets and, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a super important part. And then the third part for me is a few underlying facilitating elements, if you like. And one is super important, which is better democracy. Because, if anybody's been in Eastern European economy of old, very often the hand goes up and gets, tell me, this is the last thing you want. You don't want a, planned sort of top-down socialist economy or communist economy. And so it's very important a small number of people don't dictate this and force this on the majority, that we need to facilitate this transition through better democracy. So for me, those three parts make up degrowth.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm sort of picking up this sort of downscaling of production within planetary boundaries in a fair and just way, creating some kind of, I think that there's a phrase around public abundance and private sufficiency type stuff done in a democratic and fair way. Those are sorts of concepts that I'm hearing from both of you. I'm going to come to Uygar now to ask you, what was pick me out the most important takeaway that you got from this conference, and just say a bit more about it. And if people in the audience want to put any questions in chat, we can pick those up, and then I'll come to Sam for his top one. But Uygar, over to you.
Yes, first of all, I said it already, but the big interest is the first takeaway, which is great because that shows this is the future, right? A growing interest shows that we need to change the economy, and changing the economy is the #1 priority. The second takeaway is that it's great that the degrowth movement, which is a movement, not necessarily a scholarship, is actually joining hands with the ecological economics scholarship together, and they are looking into the same horizon, which is another good takeaway that I took from this. The third one is there is more outreach also. There is a willingness to come together with other parties. A lot of people talked about the South-North divide and the Northern degrowth movement not speaking really to the South, which is a reality. But they are trying to overcome this, which is also a great thing, because we got together in the International Degrowth Network, IDN. So you can look at degrowth.net and you can join this network too if you're interested. So we are part of it. So that network is trying to reach out and sort of break its boundaries. That's another good takeaway that I had. Okay. And then the last one is that it's not really about degrowth. It's not really about ecological economics. It's really about the next economies. So it's plural, it's next, and it is really about what we are constructing today. And that also these conferences need to have more real life experiences so that we can replicate and make those next economies possible.
Great. I love those points. Can I just do a quick follow-up question, and I'll pick up some of the ones in the chat? So I might say, Uygar, all very interesting, but I run a business. I've got shareholder returns. I've got a job, a load of people to employ. Love all the things you're saying, love all the things that's gaining interest. But how do I apply that to my actual business? Because it sounds a bit theoretical at the minute. What do you say to that?
Exactly. That's the point I was trying to say, Ben. this is what we need to ask ourselves, and this is what needs to be answered for people who are doing this business. We are answering it at the Prosumer Economy Association and Good for Trust. What we're saying is, essentially, you can make a fair wage for yourself, not necessarily spread dividends. You can become a social enterprise, still produce products and services which are beneficial for society. You can still pay fair wages to your workers. You can still, with the surplus that you're creating, invest in your business and grow it to a certain scale. It doesn't, and then essentially exist in an economy without having to grow more and more and more and have this sort of California style VC investment, growth forever mentality, but have a solid business that's creating a lifestyle for you, and you can live an honorable life. That is possible. But here the government needs to step in and prevent you from being squashed by those big actors, which are essentially driving you out of business. And that's unfair, and that needs to change.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. I won't ask you any follow-ups, although I've got them, but Sam Baker, yeah. I'll come to you. Do you want to respond to anything that you've just heard, or do you want to come in with a different point? And
just a couple of interesting points I found very quickly. So the first was is really combining sort of the reflections of two studies, which was talking about green growth, not necessarily advocating for it, but just studying it. And one was the inflationary aspect of green growth. So quite often people talk about the inflationary aspect of fossil fuels and the intrinsically deflationary of renewable energy. Certainly his study was around the inflationary impact really of any investment and capital investment. And then you've got this sort of seesaw, because what tends to happen, obviously, when you've got inflation, you then have higher interest rates to try and cap that, and those interest rates then hit on capital investment. So there was a super interesting study around that, but really just trying to say, be careful, because if you do advocate for green growth, you're likely to spark inflation as well. Now, the second thing around green growth I thought was absolutely fascinating was a key study from Tasmania. So this was somebody who had studied planning in Tasmania. They've gone 100% renewable, very attractive for people sort of coming in from the mainland to establish industry, because it's green, etc., and it's cheap, etc. But the result of that was a massive building boom and huge industrialization of certain areas of the island. So once again, a very timely, I thought, sort of reminder that we've got to think too, if we do, of course, I think the transition to renewable energy is an important component of where we're trying to get to, but we do have to think about what we do with that energy. And, this idea of sort of cheap, plentiful local energy, it's not all good. It depends what we do with it. Second thing was really around tech, which, we do have the second 45 minutes coming out on technology. But I suppose a couple of things there was really this reminder that very often technology and indeed other things that we do, new things that we do, innovations, are very much trying to address or create a specific solution to a specific problem. That problem is very often very narrowly constrained or defined. Very often the externalities aren't really considered. Obviously, tech enables you to distribute that very quickly now, potentially even globally. It's not democratic. And that point about the negative externalities is probably most obviously shown by dual use. And certainly we hear a lot of dual use at the moment in the papers, given various conflicts. So I just thought that was some really powerfully well-made points as we think about the role of technology. And then just the final thing, and this combined a couple of sort of papers on textiles and plastics. So reminding us the context of the the growth in plastics and where they come from, fossil fuels, and et cetera, and the bad things that happen. But the bottom line was saying that all the effort to think about more sustainable industries tend not to start at the top of the circular R's, but they start at the consumer level. They don't start at the design and reduce and all that sort of stuff. They don't start with the degrowth piece. They actually start after that. They just start after production, during consumption. How can we extend consumption, increase durability? How can we manage the end of the cycle better? And there was a fascinating piece of research around the EU policy making on textiles, and saying at the beginning of that, there was a sort of, outreach to lots of people. And sure enough, citizen-led sort of interest in reducing production. But as they got down the sort of the funnel of the policy and the legislation, the working groups were almost entirely interested NGOs, but almost entirely business. And by the end, the legislation was all about durability and not about reduction in production. And their point, true or not, and I suspect some people here might comment, there is no evidence. I mean, theoretically, you put an equation together, all things being equal, if you increase durability, you reduce production, but all things aren't equal. And unfortunately, there is no evidence that an increase in durability of garments actually then reduces production. So there was, those themes were sort of carried out in all sorts of different sort of forums. But anyway, just
great.
vignettes.
Thank you. I would like to pass over onto the chat. And if I wanted to come to Donna first. Donna, do you want to speak your question, or if you're not in a position to do so, I will do it, and then probably go to Rafi for the second one. And before we do that, just call out to Lou and her links in the chat to Nate Hagen's and The Great Simplification. This is one of the most remarkably brilliant things that I've ever come across. So if you've not heard of Nate Hagen's and The Great Simplification, please look that up, because the dialogues on there are absolutely life-changingly brilliant. So thank you, Lou, for reminding everybody on that one. But Donna, do you want to speak your question? We need to keep things really brief in both questions and answers. Over to you, Donna.
Great, thanks, Ben. Just thinking about the transition, which needs to be radical and fast and at scale. Does UBI have a part? And it was good to see a couple of pages on that in the Observer this weekend, Universal Basic Income, and thinking about Jason Hickel's and Rutger Bregman's pieces, books on the part that UBI, Universal Basic Income, can play in supporting a rapid and effective and radical transition to a better world. So the question is, can it, and if so, does it have to be global, or can the UK, and I know that there are some pilots going on currently, can we lead the way, and how can we support that if that's the case? And obviously aligned to forecast 8 million jobs being lost through AI. So you've got the confluence of all the macro wicked problems facing us. That was not a succinct question, sorry, but what part does UBI play, and how can we support it if so?
Who would like to answer that, Sam or Uygar?
I can start. We definitely see UBI as an important component in the transition. But we also say that we need upper income limit as well, together with UBI. So essentially here you have what everyone gets, and here you have where you can go maximum. So you can actually work in different ways and increase your UBI, but only to a certain level. So everyone gets a UBI plus, if you even do more or are active and so forth. So you don't say like everyone gets UBI and you don't get anything else. No, you get a UBI, that's for everyone, but then you get to work and do other things if you want to over your UBI. And for that, you can only go up to this level. And from that on, you don't earn any money, you only earn prestige, or you earn respect or whatever. So that's kind of the model, I think. But you said rightly, we need more examples and we need better modeling. We need like models to show us that this is viable, that it can work, and that it's not going to destroy the economy, but will be a viable economic model to continue. We need the numbers behind that.
Cool, thank
you. And just one observation would really be, if I had to, I'd go for universal basic services and high quality ones first before UBI, probably. I think that's, we've got a system which is supposed to be delivering that anyway. So I'd promote that. And it does, and universal basic, I love the concept and the idea. I am sort of slightly troubled by the idea of providing that to people who don't need it, I guess. Yeah, but maybe that's just me in an old mindset of scarcity, et cetera, et cetera. So,
okay, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Rafi, do you want to come on and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for a really interesting talk. And pitch for the next one, which we're doing on tech. I wonder whether it makes sense to distinguish between the what and the how, like, and how that felt at the conference. Like, to what degree is the conversation about what the system needs to be versus how we get there? And I suppose really to practically thinking about the how, what is the sort of discussion about bringing this relatively like marginal idea at the moment into the mainstream? Like, what's the tactical approach to that? Is that on the table? Is that part of the discussion at the conference?
So
Great question, Sam.
Yeah, so I think probably it was weighted to what rather than necessarily how. But I think there was plenty of how in there in the 950 abstracts as well. I think that so for me, if I had to sort of distill it into my best bet in terms of how, I mean, part of this is, I think part of this at the moment, part of the how is trying to, and particularly when we think about the business community and big business, part of this is trying to help business understand that we are going to see if we haven't already, a dissembling of our growth orientated economies because of all the critique that we've talked about. So we are going to see that. Now the question is, do you want to do that on a planned basis or an unplanned basis? And as a business, where, what can you do? Because you're in the existing system, you're trying to deliver on the metrics that requires, but what can you do going forward? And my question to them and my suggestion is, if nothing, carry on doing whatever you're doing if you have to, but you've got to think about the existential risk to you of a changing system. And we don't know exactly how that system's going to change. We've got lots of clues from, for instance, this conference, but many other examples dotted around the world as well. So we've got lots of clues of what this might contain and what it won't. So when you look at those, where are you going to be in the new world? How are you going to make sure that you fall on the right hand, on the right side and not the wrong side, and then get shrunk or get basically dissolved? So that for me is the challenge, is to try and bring the education, but then frame it as risk. And of course, that is a primary board responsibility. And for me, that is a part of the how. Of course, that's a mini part because there's a million other mechanisms, et cetera, to do this and to step forward. But that for me is an important part when we're talking to business.
Great, thank you.
Rafi, I would say the what and the how, we pretty much know by now. But what we need more is really actually doing stuff, case studies and demonstrations, of what is working. And then we need replication. And that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing the what, we're seeing the how, but in terms of words only, we need a real action and we need real sort of examples that are ready to be replicated in order to have this sort of bottom-up change of the differential economies. And that's what there wasn't enough in the conference, I thought.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Does anybody, I can't see any specific questions in the chat, but does anybody want to come off mute and ask anything now?
Can I come back? Can I come back on that question?
Yes.
So I suppose, obviously this is a business conversation, but I would have thought the political arena is probably the first place you'd want to go to try and make this mainstream and find leaders who are able to make an argument for, is that on the cards? Like, is anybody at this conference from any international sort of political movement?
I didn't. Uygar, did you meet anybody from?
I didn't meet anyone from the business sector, unfortunately. I only saw a few consultants that are working with businesses to transform them into a more degrowth logic, and as well as into sort of, there were questions like, how do we do marketing for degrowth businesses? Is marketing really sort of the wrong word? Is it really about communication? Do we need degrowth communication for companies? There were conversations like that, which was happening, which was, I thought, very important. But I think businesses really need to get more into, I think, this sort of discourse. And they are the ones who can provide the real practical applications and how it really unfolds in the field and in the business ecosystem. And I think that's the most important part of it. And that's why we created goodfortrust.org, because there we have over 800 businesses which are trying to build an ecosystem, trying to put those words into action. So we were there. You can think of it in those terms. But I think maybe this needs a stronger business component.
Okay.
That's for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to chip in here. So I think obviously we just had an election in the UK. Both parties stood on growth as a key foundational platform. They tended not, I found, to be challenged about, and it was always the answer to, well, how are you going to fund it? And then people would go for growth, right? Lazily, yeah, without detail. And then nobody really questioned growth how, growth. No, that conversation didn't even happen, right? So without a doubt, some level of education is required. But I think that the concern of the citizen is actually much greater. So I've done over 50 of these workshops I talked about at the beginning. And what I try and do is get people to think about, the solutions and where the solutions should lie. Should they lie at the front around human activity? Should they rely around the transition? Should they focus on direct and indirect sort of impacts of climate change? Should it be governance at a global level to stop strife, geopolitical, etc.? And almost everybody goes right at the beginning and goes, this should be about human activity. It makes sense. Of course it makes sense. Yes, we can, consumerism is a big challenge and issue. And these are people from all walks of life. So I think that whilst I can't sort of put my finger on a sort of, unfortunately, on a major party talking about this, I suspect that the, citizen-led sort of movement thinking, the level of concern around things like, parts of the polycrisis like climate change, and then their conclusion about how to deal with it is actually much closer than we think to degrowth.
Yeah, I'm going to come to Vivina in 1 second, but just want to respond to some of the things in the chat here. Sam Cooper has also called out the citizens' assemblies, and maybe if we were more deliberative, democratically led, actually this might become more mainstream more easily, because it would be bottom up from the citizens. I think that's a really good point. The need to get businesses in the discourse, as Uygar has said, and mentions of Triodos and Hans Stiegman, who talks a lot about this. Amy is on the call from Triodos today, a fantastic example of a business that really does talk about this. I don't see any others, but maybe some other people do, and you can put that in the chat if you can name some other businesses. Vivina, if I pronounce your name right, do you want to ask your question? We've literally got about 3 minutes, so over to you. You have your hand up. Vivina? No, maybe you've just got your hand up, or you're struggling to get off mute. So could I just ask in 30 seconds for Sam and Uygar to just give just closing thoughts, and I will stop you if you go on, and I will just sum up and close.
So my tuppence is basically those 3 days for me allowed things to fall into place. It makes so much sense. It has to be a very significant component of what we think about and how we deal with a transition to a safer future. Just it has to be. Now, how we package it, etc., complex. But anyway, we go.
Thank you.
My best experience was to find Sam again, definitely, and then also start thinking about how we can really be more present in this movement, and how we can move beyond just a degrowth movement mentality to new economies, new ways of doing things, and realizing that this is a diversity, just like in a forest. If businesses are diverse, economies need to be diverse as well. But it is imperative that we can't continue with the growth paradigm that we're in today.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And Vivina has just put in the chat this all-party parliamentary group on limits to growth, which I wasn't aware of at all. So thank you very much for sharing that. I need to click on that link. There's been some amazing fast topics here. It's felt like some kind of mass speed dating, and we never really got into the depths of some of them. But we've talked about a broad definition around downscaling in a just way that is within planetary boundaries and democratic. We've talked about this as a growing concept with all of these different conferences and stuff starting maybe to get in the mainstream, but there's definitely a drive towards that. We've talked about the need to be careful around the concepts of degrowth and tech, because they may be driving us in the wrong direction. And we've talked about the need to maybe get businesses on board by thinking this as a de-risking the future. But we've also acknowledged that we need more case studies and we need more businesses to be speaking about this. So I'd like to thank Sam and Uygar so much for your time and for coming on board today and for giving your feedback. I'd like to thank everybody on the call for your participation. Sorry if I didn't get to all the questions. We have our second knowledge exchange starting in about 1 minute. The link is in the chat there, and this is about tech and it's the growing footprint of virtualized services, which is not virtualized at all. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. I hope to see at least some of you in the next 30 seconds, but if not, enjoy your week and catch you soon. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.